Australia has new hate speech laws, and they come with mandatory minimum jail time. No, I don't like hate speech. I don't think any reasonable person does. I don't like seeing extremist symbols or hopping on X and seeing the most vile white supremacist takes since World War II. I don't like reading news reports about neo-Nazis in the streets of Australia. It's good to hate hate speech, but sunlight can be the best disinfectant. And if we're not careful, our attempts to remove hate speech from society may actually be what helps it grow. Before we get into the bill itself, a bit of background. On the 7th of October 2023, Hamas, a militia group from the Gaza Strip, launched a terrorist attack on Israel, killing approximately 1,200 Israelis and kidnapping 240 civilians. This action, along with the decades of tension already centered in the minds of both Israelis and Palestinians, was the preceding event for the current stage of the Israel-Palestine war. A war that to date has led to tens of thousands of innocent men, women, and children being killed needlessly due to leaders who don't actually care about their people. Back home, bias, harassment, and hate speech subsequently followed, with a significant increase in both anti-Muslim and anti-Semitic rhetoric. You had things like synagogues being firebombed, or Muslims being threatened, and the Christchurch massacre being invoked. On the 13th of October 2023, a candlelight vigil was held for those murdered and kidnapped by Hamas, with Australia's National Socialist Network, an alleged neo-Nazi group, gathering outside Flinders Street Station in Melbourne, Victoria, and displaying anti-Semitic banners. They were moved on by police, and then subsequently went into the station and performed Roman salutes, as well as got on a train, asked people if they were Jewish, and handed out promotional materials for the NSN if they weren't. In response to this, on the 21st of October 2023, Victoria tightened its laws around hate symbols and hate speech, passing state laws that made it an offence to display Nazi symbols and gestures, with a maximum penalty of $23,000, 12 months in prison, or both. As anyone should be able to guess, it didn't work. Later that year, on the 3rd of December, 30 NSN members marched through the streets of Melbourne, but this time, instead of displaying hate symbols, they just elected to carry a banner displaying Australia for the white man. Subtle messaging, I know. That same day, though, a 15-year-old onlooker used a Nazi salute to allegedly show support of the march. Just keep that in the back of your head. Following this, the federal government followed Victoria's journey, and on the 11th of December 2023, Albanese's Labour government successfully passed through amendments to the Criminal Code, making it a national offence to display or trade Nazi or Islamic State symbols in public. At the same time, they established new and strengthened anti-terrorism laws. I don't have much to say on these. They'll come up occasionally, but yeah, they also did that too. On the 8th of January 2024, the law came into effect, having a max penalty of 12 months for crimes involving symbols and 7 years for crimes involving terrorism. If you guessed this also didn't do anything, you would be right. On the 26th of January 2025, the NSN marched through Adelaide towards the War Memorial, chanting "Australia for the white man," again, subtle, I know, and allegedly, at least one member displayed Nazi symbols. 16 people were arrested, including a 16-year-old, with the charges ranging. This march, of course, was widely condemned, and on the 6th of February 2025, based on the success of their previous amendments, the Australian federal government passed through further amendments to the Criminal Code. And right at the last second, this thing called mandatory minimum sentencing snuck its way in. Strong caveat as always, I'm not a lawyer, so take the legal talk with a grain of salt. Taking a step back to the 2023 amendments to the Criminal Code, they made it illegal to display or trade prohibited symbols. That meant physically, patches, banners, all that, but also the media. There were obvious exceptions, like if the symbols were shown in the context of opposing a radical ideology. Museums, scientific, artistic, and educational institutions and projects were fine. Journalists were fine. And there was a specific part about religious groups who used the swastika in a way that didn't promote harm also being fine. It wasn't this catch-all. To be found guilty, the court had to prove someone intended to incite harm or hate beyond a reasonable doubt. The defendant's actions had to be purposeful, meaning they must have actively chosen to target a group rather than acting recklessly or negligently. Let's use a specific example. A person would have had to vandalize a mosque with the specific goal of targeting Muslim people and intending to harm that religious group. Their actions weren't just reckless or indifferent, they were purposefully directed at the group because of their religious identity. If that happened, then a person found guilty could be fined up to $120,000, spend 12 months in prison, or both. Could being the important word there. The 2025 amendments substantially changed things. Some good, some not so good. Firstly, the government expanded the list of groups that would be protected under the bill, additionally including sex, sexual orientation, gender identity, intersex status, and disability, on top of the already existing race, religion, nationality, national or ethnic origin, and political opinion. Amazing. Very little to criticize there. If the amendments ended here, I wouldn't even be making a video. The amendments also changed the fault element, reducing it from intentional to reckless. What that means is the defendant was aware of the risk that their actions could target a specific group, but ignored or disregarded the risk. For example, a person who vandalizes a mosque without caring whether it is a religious place may be reckless in targeting a group based on religion. They don't have to be certain about the religious affiliation, but if they ignored an obvious risk, then they could still be guilty. Makes sense, I guess? I don't have a strong opinion. The bill also criminalized threatening a protected group, with a max penalty of 7 years if the threat itself threatened peace and order, for example, if it was a broad threat that damages social cohesion. But if it didn't threaten social cohesion per se, and it was just a targeted threat to a single individual from a protected group, then that's a 5-year maximum sentence. Again, seems fine. I don't really have a criticism there. The big kicker in this amendment was the introduction of mandatory minimum sentencing. What that means is if found intentionally guilty of displaying a prohibited symbol, or terrorist symbol, they must receive a mandatory sentence of 12 months in prison. Why is that a problem? Well, mandatory minimum sentencing sucks. It's a sentence that should send ice through your veins. Australian criminal law sets a maximum penalty for an offence, and a judge or magistrate gets to set the sentence up to the max penalty. They have discretion based on the situation in front of them. Mandatory minimum sentencing rips that away and forces judges or magistrates to give a minimum criminal sentence. It shifts discretion away from the sunlight of the judiciary and into the darkness of police or prosecutors. People are also less inclined to take guilty pleas when they're guaranteed the minimum anyway. Juries may be less likely to convict because they know they're condemning someone to a minimum sentence, and long jail sentences cost more and do less. The best disinfectant is often sunlight, and criminalizing hate symbols doesn't stop radicalization. It just means racists get better at dog whistling and hiding in the shadows. I recognize a lot of people won't have an issue with these amendments, and I'm screaming into the void. They'll ask, why waste breath defending people who spew hate speech? And to that I say, I don't think it's wasted breath. Neo-Nazi organizations rely on conscripting vulnerable young men into their orbit. They lure boys in with boxing lessons, health and fitness groups, and a community where someone who is isolated finally feels connected for the first time in who knows how long. They don't find radicals, they make them. They don't start with overt racism and hatred towards minorities. It's more subtle. Have you considered X? What do you think about Y? What do you think about this quote I read from a book? What about this chapter? And genuinely, as stupid as it sounds, it leads to a lonely, isolated kid reading things like Mein Kampf and being told by the only community they have that this is the truth of the world. It's like a frog in boiling water, except instead of boiling alive, it goes back to its lily pad and starts asking about wooden doors and becoming really interested in the efficiency of the local pizza oven. Alright. Let's say an 18-year-old who's been indoctrinated since 16 goes to an Australia Day protest and gives a Roman salute or wears an extremist symbol. I ask you, is the best course of action to deal with that person, to throw them in jail for a year, to absolutely ruin their job prospects? To put them around other extremists and violent offenders in prison? Do we really believe the best course of action to stop hate is to force the courts to lock people up, remove discretion and community approaches? Famously, prisons are one of the places you're least likely to find other extremists. Come on. Exit Australia is an independent support group who helps extremists change. They receive no government funding and run out of a single house. They are invaluable. Recently, they assisted one mother in getting her son into an early intervention program after he became indoctrinated. But that was only after Matt Quinn, founder and CEO of Exit Australia, lobbied a politician to help. And it did help, despite the fact that NSN members who radicalized him tried to contact the boy and pull him back into the fold. That child from the story is 18 now. If he was pulled back into the NSN because something bad happened and he was vulnerable again, and he did something racist and vile like perform a salute or wear a symbol, do we really think sending that man to prison will help him? Thankfully, the federal government has committed $106 million over 4 years to countering violent extremism programs. But what do we do with those who are already radicalized or deep in the pipeline? According to the government, it's prison. I would disagree. Mandatory minimum sentencing does not seem to work. It leads to punishments that don't fit the crime and greater reoffending as people are thrown into environments that are not good for their learning or moral character. I mean, it's ridiculous. Mandatory minimum sentencing is against Labor's own policy. This inclusion of mandatory minimum sentencing was thrown into the bill to make Labor seem strong on hate speech and not look weaker than the coalition. But it is weak. Strength is good leadership. Principled leadership. This was not principled or right. Hate speech isn't good, but if it's out in the open, we can come together as a society, all hear it, and say it's wrong. If you condemn it to the shadows, it doesn't go away. It just learns how to exist without the average person hearing it. But hey, come join the Discord, come talk about it, come say hi, come let me know what you think in the comments. It's been real.